The hum of the projector filled the silence as the lights dimmed across the boardroom. On the wall, the company's new logo shimmered. Lucent Dynamics. All glass and ambition. It was supposed to represent clarity and evolution. To me, it just looked expensive. At the head of the table stood Ava Sinclair, the newest executive on the leadership team. Barely 33, sharp suit, sharper smile. The kind of confidence that came from being the youngest person ever promoted to senior vice president. She'd been at Lucent less than a year, but already acted like she owned the place. "Let's begin," she said, voice cool and rehearsed. "This rebrand will position us as the market's innovation leader. The era of outdated systems and legacy thinking is over." She said legacy like it was a disease. I almost smiled. I sat near the end of the long conference table. No title plate, no spotlight, just a plain notepad in front of me. Most of them called me Tom or the consultant. That was fine. I preferred it that way. When you've built something from the ground up, you don't need to announce it every time you walk into the room. The CEO, Daniel Reed, sat quietly beside her. Calm, unreadable, eyes steady on the presentation. He didn't interrupt. He rarely did. Daniel understood people best when they thought he wasn't listening. Ava clicked to the next slide. Project Velocity. Color palettes, buzzwords, market penetration charts, all smoke and mirrors. "This," she said, tapping the screen, "is how we differentiate ourselves. It's bold, disruptive, modern. We'll phase out the old processes completely. We move fast or we fall behind." "Interesting," I said. "And what's our fallback if clients reject this direction?" Her eyes flicked toward me, the faintest irritation flashing across her perfect smile. "We won't need one, Thomas. The market is begging for change." "Change," I said slowly, "or trust?" Her brows arched. "Excuse me?" "The clients," I said, leaning forward slightly. "They've been with us for years because they trust our systems. The outdated ones you're eager to erase. Sometimes the illusion of speed can cost more than the delay." A few people shifted in their chairs. Ava's tone sharpened. "We appreciate your perspective, but this isn't about the past. This is about leadership. Progress means risk." "Leadership," I said gently, "also means listening." That landed like a stone dropped into glass water. Daniel didn't say a word, but I caught the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. He was enjoying this. Ava smiled wider, the way people do when they've decided to win, not learn. "With all due respect, Thomas, your methods might have worked 10 years ago, but our competitors aren't waiting for us to reminisce." "I wasn't reminiscing," I said. "I was warning." That earned me a few raised eyebrows around the table. Ava chuckled softly. "Duly noted. Let's move on." By the time the meeting ended, her energy filled the room like static. She had everyone convinced this new direction was brilliance, not risk. Everyone except Daniel and me. He waited until the others filed out before speaking. "You've got a way of choosing your moments." I smiled, only when the moment's already chosen itself. He leaned back, studying me. "You could have shut her down." "I could have," I said. "But why stop a storm when it still thinks it's a breeze?" He laughed quietly. "You always did prefer lessons that teach themselves." "Some people," I said, standing, "only learn when the floor collapses beneath them." Daniel gave a small nod, eyes glinting. "Then let's see how she handles the aftershock." I left the boardroom and walked past the glass walls of Lucent's top floor. The city spread below, Endless lights, endless ambition. In every reflection, Ava's voice echoed in my mind. This isn't about the past. This is about leadership. She thought leadership was presentation slides and confident tone. She didn't know it was silence, the kind that waits for people to reveal themselves. By tomorrow, she'd start pushing harder, speaking louder, proving herself in all the wrong ways. And when she finally reached the point where power felt certain, that's when she'd learn what power actually looked like. It looked like patience. It looked like Daniel's quiet nod. It looked like me. By the next week, the atmosphere inside Lucent's headquarters had changed. You could feel it in the elevator rides. Fewer smiles, more silence. Every department suddenly had urgent directives from Ava Sinclair. She'd found her rhythm. Decisive, ambitious, and ruthless enough to make people mistake fear for respect. To her, that was leadership. To everyone else, it was exhaustion. I'd seen it before, the rise of someone who thought authority was earned by volume. And I knew exactly where it ended. She started with the small moves. My name disappeared from key email chains. Project documents I'd written were updated overnight, stripped of details that didn't match her narrative. During meetings, she redirected questions meant for me with a smooth, "Thomas and I discussed it. I'll summarize." We hadn't. It was textbook insecurity. Build your credibility by dismantling someone else's. And I let her. Every single time. I didn't challenge her. I didn't defend myself. I simply observed. Because Daniel had asked me to come back to Lucent for one reason. Not to advise. Not to design. But to see. He suspected the company's culture had lost its compass after rapid expansion. He wanted to know which leaders acted out of vision and which ones acted out of vanity. Ava was proving the test unnecessary. One morning I arrived early to the 21st floor conference room. Through the glass I saw her briefing her team, laser-focused and commanding. She moved through slides like a performer in her spotlight, voice confident and clipped. "And let's be clear," she said. "Our clients aren't interested in outdated safety nets. We sell innovation now. Fear of failure isn't strategy, it's weakness." I waited until she finished before stepping in. "Good presentation," I said, "but innovation and recklessness aren't synonyms." She turned, perfectly poised. "I appreciate your input, Thomas, but I prefer momentum over hesitation." "And I prefer results over optics," I said lightly. "We might find common ground somewhere in between." Her smile tightened, the kind that said, "You'll regret that one day." Later that afternoon, she scheduled a meeting with me to align on deliverables. Translation, a performance correction. Her office was minimalist and cold, all white marble and curated confidence. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "I wanted to touch base," she said smoothly. "I've noticed your reports tend to question directives that have already been approved. It creates confusion." "Questioning isn't confusion," I said. "It's how we avoid repeating mistakes." "Of course," she replied, tone syrup sweet. "But leadership requires unity. I need the team to see one direction, one message. That's how you build trust." I studied her for a moment. "Do you believe trust is built by agreement or by truth?" Her lips parted slightly, just enough hesitation to expose the crack. Then she recovered. "I believe results are what matter. Once those come in, everything else follows." "Until it doesn't," I said quietly. She didn't like that answer. "Thomas, let me be direct," she said, folding her hands. "Your experience is impressive, but Lucent is evolving. You either adapt to new leadership or you risk becoming an obstacle to it. I smiled faintly. Noted. Good, she said, standing. Then we understand each other. Yes, I said, rising too. Perfectly. She thought she'd delivered a warning. She didn't realize she'd just delivered proof. When I returned to my desk, Daniel was waiting in the corridor. He looked like he hadn't moved in an hour, hands in pockets, expression unreadable. Rough meeting? He asked casually. She's confident, I said. Arrogant? Not yet, I said. Give her another week. He smirked. You're enjoying this too much. I'm not, I said. But I do appreciate symmetry. He tilted his head. Meaning? People who chase control eventually hand it over. They just don't realize it's happening until the floor gives way. Daniel nodded slowly, that familiar glint in his eyes, the look of a man already thinking 3 moves ahead. Let her keep running, he said. The higher she climbs, the cleaner the fall. That evening, as I left the building, I glanced up at the top floor. Ava's light was still on. Through the tinted glass, I could see her pacing, rehearsing for something. Maybe the investor presentation next week. She wanted to impress Daniel. She wanted to prove she belonged at his level. But she'd made a mistake most ambitious people make when the room goes quiet. She thought silence meant permission. What it really meant was observation. And Lucent's 2 silent observers, Daniel and I, were watching her build the stage she'd soon fall from. The investor briefing felt like theater, the kind with velvet curtains and a trap door you don't see until it opens. The room was today we present Project Velocity, the platform that will define our next decade. Slide 1, market heat maps. Slide 2, adoption curves. Slide 3, a bar chart so steep it looked like a ladder to heaven. Quarter-on-quarter churn down to 2.3%, she said, chin lifted. Net revenue retention at 134% in enterprise. Heads nodded. Someone actually wrote stellar on a pad. I glanced at my notes. Our last verified churn, 4.9%. Retention, 119% with asterisks for incentives that expired in 6 weeks. She clicked forward. Latency improvements averaged 38% across regions. The map glowed. Pretty data, untested. A hand rose from the second row, an investor we'd courted for a year and won with brutal honesty. Can you break out retention without promotional overlays? Ava smiled. Conservative view still exceeds 130%. I cleared my throat. It's 117.6 on a trailing basis without overlays. I kept my tone even, non-confrontational. Page 12 of the backup. Dozens of eyes pivoted to me. The room shifted by a few degrees. Ava didn't miss a beat. She didn't grant me one either. We'll align on definitions later, she said, her smile tightening. What matters is direction, momentum. Definitions are why momentum means anything, I said gently. Something flashed behind her eyes. Irritation, then calculation. She moved to the risk slide, shorthanded into 3 neat bullets, all verbs and no nouns. Mitigation ranges were missing. I knew because I'd written them. An enterprise CIO, one of our loudest advocates, leaned toward the mic. Your deck calls the European rollout substantially complete. Our teams are still on the pilot build. Which definition of complete are we using? I could feel the air thin. Ava's reply was smooth. Operationally complete. Procurement cycles create the appearance of delay. It's not appearance, I said, tapping my folder. We have 2 blockers, contractual indemnity and data residency. They're not cosmetic. Silence. A muscle jumped in her jaw. She turned from the audience to me, not bothering to hide it now. "Thomas, do you want to run this meeting?" I met her gaze. "I want us to walk out with the truth still attached to our name." A soft, collective inhale. Daniel's expression didn't change. He might as well have been a portrait. Ava pivoted back to the room, voice sweet enough to cut enamel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the digression. Legacy consultants sometimes struggle with the pace we operate at now." She let legacy hang like smoke, then crisp as a blade. "To avoid further confusion, effective immediately, I'm terminating the consulting engagement that has impeded our direction." The sentence hung there, outrageous and precise. She'd rehearsed it. The investors looked to Daniel. So did half the leadership row. He folded his hands, eyes unreadable. "Your call," he said. A few pens stopped moving. Ava turned to me, triumphant. "Thank you for your contributions, Thomas. HR will handle your exit." I nodded once. "Of course." I stood, slid my notebook into my bag, and straightened my jacket. "Before I go, one correction for the record. Churn is 4.9%. Net retention, 119%, inclusive of expiring incentives, and European rollout is at pilot with outstanding legal, page 12, as noted. I'm sure the appendix will make that clear." A cough became a laugh, and then died quickly. No one wanted to be first. I walked the length of the room without hurry. The screen behind me pulsed with the lucent mark, bright and blank, as if it had nothing to do with any of this. At the door, I paused. Ava was already back in her slides, voice high on the chemical of victory. She mistook stillness for surrender. In the hallway, the soundproofing swallowed the room's applause, if there was any. I checked my phone. A message from Daniel waited like a coin on a windowsill. 11:07 a.m. D. Lunch, 12:30. Same place. I replied with a single dot. He didn't need more. HR called before I reached the elevator. Scripted compassion, calendar slots, badge return. I thanked them. When you've built something, you don't snatch at small theater. Downstairs, the lobby glass mirrored a version of me that looked almost bored. Outside, the city had switched to noon, messengers darting, tie knots loosening, ambition trading hands in the open air. I crossed to the cafe where Daniel preferred corners and unsentimental coffee. He arrived 2 minutes late, which for Daniel counted as dramatic. He set his phone face down, gave me that winter-thin smile. "Well," he said, "we learned." "We did," I said. He stirred nothing in his cup. And she performed. She did. He took a breath like he'd been holding it since the slide with the bar chart. "Board session Monday. I'd like you in the chair to my right." I sipped, let the heat anchor me. Formal? Very. Through the window, I could see the top floor of Lucent's tower, a square of light where a woman was probably rehearsing new lines for a script she believed she owned. I didn't feel angry. I felt the clean click of a lock about to turn. "You gave her the choice," I said. Daniel nodded. "People tell you who they are when you give them a stage." He lifted his cup. 2 stages. I touched mine to his. And to microphones that work. When the email hit my inbox that evening, it was almost poetic in its formality. Subject: termination of consulting agreement. 5 paragraphs of polite dismissal, 2 of legal reassurance, and 1 final line that read like punctuation. Effective immediately, your services are no longer required at Lucent Dynamics. I'd seen hundreds of them over my career. I'd even written a few. But this one was different. It was written by a woman who thought she'd won. Ava Sinclair had no idea what she'd actually done. The next morning, I arrived at Lucent for the last time, or at least that's what everyone assumed. The receptionist greeted me with that awkward sympathy people reserve for the newly unemployed. "Mr. Vale," she said softly, "HR asked that you hand in your badge on your way out." I smiled. Of course. Upstairs, Ava's assistant looked like she'd seen a ghost when I stepped off the elevator. "She's in her office," she stammered. "I'll let her know." "No need," I said. "I'll announce myself." Her glass door was open. Ava stood at her desk, sunlight slanting across the room like a stage light. When she saw me, she straightened, chin lifted, the same cool composure she'd worn during the investor meeting. "Thomas," she said, crisp as ever, "I didn't expect to see you." "I thought I'd make it official," I said, holding up the printed termination letter. "Always nice to end things in person." Her lips curved, a smile honed for optics. "I appreciate your professionalism," she said. "Lucent's direction is shifting, and I have to make hard decisions. You understand." "I do," I said, "completely." I let a small pause linger, just long enough for her to think the conversation was over. Then I added, "You did what you thought looked strong. Sometimes that's enough, until someone notices the foundation." Her expression flickered, then smoothed. "If that's a metaphor, Thomas, I'm afraid I don't have time for riddles today." "Don't worry," I said softly. "You'll understand it soon." She frowned slightly, but before she could reply, my phone buzzed. I checked it casually, knowing exactly what the message would be. Daniel Reed, Monday, boardroom, emails to the executive team about decisive leadership. A company-wide memo celebrating transparency and accountability. Even a post on LinkedIn tagged with hashtag leadership in action, showcasing her bold call to streamline operations. The comments were predictable: applause, admiration, envy. All from people who didn't realize they were clapping for a performance that was about to end. Monday came quietly. I arrived at the Lucent Tower before sunrise. Security didn't stop me. They knew me better than most executives did. The boardroom was already set, 12 chairs, glass walls, and a view of the city waking up below. Daniel was there, standing by the window, coffee in hand. "She's ready," he said without turning. "Overconfident?" "Utterly," he said. "She thinks today's her victory lap." I nodded. "Then let's give her the applause she's earned." At 8 sharp, Ava entered, every step rehearsed. She wore navy, the same shade Daniel often did. Subtle mimicry. Strategic. Calculated. "Good morning," she said, voice bright, confident. "I've prepared a short presentation on executive realignment following last week's investor session." Daniel gestured toward the table. "Go ahead." She launched into her slides, animated and polished. She spoke of decisive transitions and strategic clarity, peppering the air with buzzwords that meant nothing but sounded impressive. Halfway through, she paused, smiling. "Sometimes leadership means making difficult choices," she said, glancing my way. "But progress doesn't come from hesitation. It comes from conviction." Daniel let her finish. Then he set his coffee down. "Ava," he said, voice even. "You're right. Leadership is about conviction, and I appreciate yours." Her smile widened. "Thank you." He continued, calm as stone. "I'd like to introduce someone before we move forward with next quarter's plan. He's been with Lucent from the beginning, helped build it, in fact. He's also our majority partner." The room went still. Ava blinked. "I'm sorry?" Daniel looked at me. "Thomas?" I stood, buttoned my jacket, and stepped forward. The air in the room shifted. Slow, heavy, electric. "I believe we've already met," I said softly. Ava's face drained of color. Her mouth opened just slightly, but no sound came out. I looked at her the way an architect might look at a building that had ignored its blueprints. "You were right about one thing," I said. "Lucent is evolving, but it's not your direction we'll be following." Daniel folded his hands. "Let's proceed." Ava sank into her chair, suddenly small in the space she'd dominated a week ago. And as the projector light caught her reflection on the glass wall, I realized something quietly poetic. She had wanted a stage so badly, and she finally got one. The only problem was, now everyone could see who she really was. The moment the doors closed, the temperature in the boardroom dropped a few degrees. It wasn't the air conditioning, it was awareness. Everyone felt it. The quiet before consequence. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lighting, the city skyline framed behind it like an audience. Around the table sat Lucent's 12 directors, each one pretending not to sense the shift. Only Daniel looked at ease, fingers drumming lightly against his coffee cup. I took my seat to his right, the chair reserved for ownership, the seat no one had seen me occupy in years. Across from us, Ava Sinclair sat rigid, her knuckles white against the arms of her chair. The presentation remote she'd been holding earlier lay abandoned beside her notepad. Her confidence had evaporated into the recycled air. Daniel cleared his throat. "Before we begin with quarterly items, there's a matter of structure we need to finalize. Most of you have worked with Thomas Vale in some capacity." Heads nodded, murmurs of recognition. "You've known him as a senior consultant. What you didn't know is that Thomas is also Lucent's majority shareholder and co-founder." A ripple moved through the room. A chair creaked. Someone exhaled audibly. Ava blinked once, twice, the kind of blinking that's really a plea for the world to reset. She looked from Daniel to me, searching for a hint of humor. There wasn't any. Daniel continued, voice smooth and deliberate. "Thomas stepped away from day-to-day operations 5 years ago, but he's remained our principal investor. Recently, he returned to quietly observe the leadership climate. His insights have been illuminating." Her throat moved as she swallowed. You sent him here to spy?" "No," Daniel said, still calm. "To listen. Something you've struggled with." I didn't speak yet. I wanted the silence to stretch, to let her feel its edges. When I finally did, it was with the same measured tone I'd used the day she fired me. "You spoke often about vision," I said, "but you never looked at where you were standing. You built a ladder on sand and called it progress." She straightened, color rising back to her face. "If this was a test, it was unethical. You misrepresented—" "I didn't misrepresent anything," I interrupted softly. "You assumed." Her lips parted, but Daniel cut in before she could recover. "The board reviewed your recent decisions," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Your unilateral termination of our partner consultant during a live investor session raised concerns. That consultant was a founder, and your falsified retention figures, those concern us even more." A director opened the folder, scanning. "These numbers weren't validated by finance. They were rewritten," Daniel confirmed, "for optics." Ava's mask cracked. "That's not—" "I was simplifying for presentation. You told me to be bold." "I told you to be accurate," he said, voice flattening. "Boldness without integrity isn't leadership. It's theater." Her hands trembled now. "This isn't fair. I was trying to prove I could lead." I leaned forward slightly. Leadership isn't something you perform. It's something you protect. You used fear to look strong. That's not strength. It's panic dressed in confidence. A silence thick enough to feel settled over the table. Daniel opened another folder, this one smaller, cleaner. Inside a single page. He slid it across the polished surface toward her. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your employment with Lucent Dynamics is terminated for cause." Her chair creaked as she leaned back, eyes darting from him to the paper. "You're firing me? Here?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "Here. The same way you did to someone you thought couldn't fight back." I added quietly, "The difference is, I didn't need to." For a long moment, no one moved. Even the city outside seemed to pause, as if holding its breath for her reply. Then, in a small voice that barely resembled the one that had filled this room a week ago, she whispered, "You could have told me." "I tried," I said. "Every time I spoke, you were too busy rehearsing your next line." She looked down at the letter, the Lucent logo glinting at the top, and gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "So that's it. Lesson delivered." "No," I said softly. "Lesson received. What you do with it is yours." She signed the paper with a trembling hand. The pen clattered to the table when she dropped it. Then she stood, gathering the pieces of her pride as best she could, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. "You humiliated me." Daniel's voice was steady. "No. You did that when you mistook cruelty for competence. We just let the truth catch up." The door closed behind her with the softest click imaginable. The kind of sound that stills an entire room. After she left, Daniel exhaled slowly. The board began murmuring again, relieved, cautious. I said nothing. The city outside glowed gold and cold, reflected in the glass. "She'll tell herself this was betrayal," Daniel said quietly. "That's easier than admitting it was a mirror." "She'll have time to understand," I said. "Failure's a good teacher when no one's watching." He nodded. "You handled it gracefully." I smiled faintly. Grace is just control that doesn't announce itself. We sat in silence for a while longer, two men watching the skyline rebuild itself in miniature across the boardroom glass. Somewhere down below, Ava Sinclair was stepping into an elevator, leaving the company she'd tried to conquer. And above her, Lucent kept shining, a reminder that light doesn't care who stands beneath it. News travels differently inside corporations. It doesn't shout, it seeps. It starts as a whisper in HR, becomes a rumor by lunch, and turns into gospel by afternoon. By the time Ava's elevator hit the lobby, half the building already knew she was gone. By evening, everyone knew how she was gone. The official announcement came through a sterile company-wide email. Subject: Leadership Transition. Effective immediately, Ava Sinclair will be departing Lucent Dynamics to pursue new opportunities. We thank her for her contributions and wish her the best in future endeavors. Daniel Reed, CEO. 2 sentences, 32 words, and a silence so heavy it could have been an Some smiled in disbelief. Others looked embarrassed, like they'd laughed at a joke they didn't understand until the punchline hit. At the analytics department, one of Ava's former assistants stood to greet us. She looked nervous. "Mr. Vale," she said, "I wanted to apologize if—" I raised a hand gently. "Don't. You were following direction. You didn't fail. Your environment did." Her shoulders eased, and for the first time since I'd returned, I saw something rare at Lucent. Relief. By mid-afternoon, the internal news leaked outside. The business press loved it. The perfect cocktail of irony and humiliation. Headlines appeared within hours. Lucent executive fires founder during investor meeting. CEO's silent partner revealed in boardroom shakeup. The consultant who owned everything. We didn't comment. We didn't need to. Lucent's stock dipped for 24 hours, then rose higher than before. Investors called Daniel privately. "That was leadership," one said. "You handled it clean." In truth, Daniel hadn't handled it. He'd simply let the truth do what it always does when given a stage. That evening, I found myself back in the boardroom, the same room where Ava had tried to make me disappear. The skyline was orange with sunset, glass towers catching fire in the reflection. Daniel joined me with 2 glasses of scotch and that rare look of satisfaction that only comes after surviving a storm you didn't start. "She's already wiped her LinkedIn," he said. "No trace of Lucent. Just former executive, leadership advocate." I chuckled softly. People never delete the word leadership. It's armor. He smirked. "She'll find another job. Probably give a TED talk about lessons learned." "Maybe she'll finally mean it," I said. We clinked glasses. 2 floors below, the office buzzed with something new, a mix of caution and curiosity. Meetings that had once been stifling now sounded collaborative. Junior employees spoke up in conversations that used to be monopolized by titles. It wasn't chaos. It was freedom, learning how to walk again. At 7 p.m., I sent a short message to the company. Subject, looking forward. Growth doesn't begin with change. It begins with truth. Thank you for reminding me what this company was built for. Thomas Vale. No titles, no signature lines, just my name. The replies flooded in, brief, grateful, and honest. Thank you for seeing us. Welcome home. About time someone unmuted the culture. Later, Daniel and I stood by the window, watching the last of the daylight fade. "You think she'll ever understand?" he asked. "Eventually," I said. The illusion of control doesn't vanish all at once. It fades. Right after you realize no one's watching anymore. He nodded. "And what now?" "Now," I said, "we rebuild. Quietly." Down in the lobby, I passed a security guard who smiled as I left. "Good night, Mr. Vale." It had been a long time since anyone had said that with respect, not protocol. Outside, the city lights blinked like signals, tiny affirmations that truth had a way of coming back, no matter how deep it was buried. Lucent's glass tower reflected the skyline back at itself, the logo glowing faintly near the top. For the first time, it felt honest. The city forgets quickly, but the industry doesn't. By the time a month passed, Ava Sinclair's name had become a whispered case study, a cautionary tale, passed around conference tables and LinkedIn think pieces. No one called her evil. That would have been too simple. They called her ambitious, misguided, a reminder. The kind of words people use when they recognize themselves in the wreckage. One crisp morning in early spring, I saw her again. Not in a boardroom, but across a coffee shop in Midtown. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. Her hair was still immaculate, but her eyes carried that hollow focus of someone who hadn't stopped replaying their own downfall. She was sitting alone with a laptop, headphones in, reading a job listing. A mug of coffee sat untouched beside her, the foam long gone. I considered walking past. I'd told Daniel I was done thinking about her, but unfinished conversations have a way of haunting you. So I ordered a black coffee, took the seat across from her, and said quietly, "Still prefer oat milk, I see." She froze, then looked up slowly. For a second there was that flash of old defiance, the one that could silence a room. Then it softened. "Thomas." "Ava." Her voice was steadier than I expected. "If you're here to gloat, I'd rather you didn't." "I'm not," I said. "If I wanted to gloat, I'd have stayed silent." She studied me for a long moment. "Then what do you want?" "Closure," I said, "for both of us." She sighed, closing her laptop. "You humiliated me." "No," I said gently. "You exposed yourself. I just let the truth keep its microphone." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but bitter. "Do you know how many calls I've lost since that story broke? Recruiters hang up when they realize who I am." "You built your reputation on being unstoppable," I said. "It's hard to hire someone who's still running." That earned a soft laugh, the first genuine sound I'd heard from her in months. "You sound like you practiced that line." "I did," I said. "I never got to say it during the board meeting." She leaned back. "You really were the owner." "I still am." A silence fell between us. Outside, taxis bled color into the wet pavement. The world moved, unaware that two people were trying to rewrite a moment that couldn't be undone. She finally spoke. "I thought you were testing me." "I was," I said, "but not the way you think. I wasn't testing your intelligence, Ava. I was testing your humility. You failed the same way I once did." That surprised her. "You?" I nodded. 10 years ago, Daniel and I built Lucent on ego. We were the smartest men in every room, until we weren't. I lost everything for 2 years. That's when I learned that control is just fear wearing a suit. She looked away, eyes glassy. "Fear," she repeated quietly. "I was terrified of being irrelevant." "And you became exactly that," I said softly. "Because relevance, built on dominance, always expires." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the cafe filled the silence, clinking cups, distant laughter, the hiss of steamed milk. Then she looked at me again, this time without armor. "What happens now?" "You rebuild," I said. "Just not with fire this time." She nodded slowly, understanding, but not ready to admit it aloud. "Do you think they'll ever forget?" "Maybe," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't come from the ones watching. It comes from what you do when no one is." She blinked away the tears she refused to let fall. "You're still teaching lessons, I see." "I'm just passing along the ones I paid for." When I stood to leave, she didn't stop me. As I turned toward the door, she said quietly, "Thank you for not hating me." I paused. "Hate's easy," I said. "Understanding takes work, and work's the one thing you've never been afraid of." Her smile was faint, but real. "Good luck, Thomas." "Same to you, Ava." Outside, the city air bit cold against my skin, sharp and clean. I didn't look back, but I knew she would. Not at me, but at herself, reflected in the cafe window. Realizing, maybe for the first time, that reflection wasn't failure. It was clarity. Somewhere behind me, she was already rewriting her story. And for the first time, I believed she might actually finish it right. As I crossed the street, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Board wants to name you chairman again. Are you ready to stop hiding?" I typed back one word. Almost. Then I slipped my phone into my pocket and kept walking, letting the noise of the city swallow the past one block at a time. The first morning I stepped back into Lucent's headquarters as chairman, the air felt different. Lighter, quieter. Not silent in the way it had been under fear, but steady, alive. Conversations filled the hallways now, real ones, not the kind rehearsed for hierarchy. For the first time in years, people looked each other in the eye. I walked the same corridor I'd walked as a ghost 6 months earlier, the consultant no one listened to. Now, faces turned as I passed, not out of intimidation, but acknowledgement. There's a difference between being obeyed and being respected. I'd spent years learning that difference the hard way. When I entered the boardroom, Daniel was already there. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the window open to the spring breeze. He smiled when he saw me. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" "It should," I said. "We earned it." He chuckled. "You mean survived it. Survival's where most rebuilding starts." We sat in silence for a moment, the city moving far below. The same city that had watched our little empire rise, crack, and reassemble itself. Daniel poured 2 coffees and slid one toward me. "So, what now? Another rebrand?" I shook my head. "No new slogans, no new logos. Just truth." He nodded slowly, understanding. We'd spent years trying to make Lucent sound powerful. Now it finally was. Quietly, authentically. Because the noise was gone. Later that week, I hosted an all-hands meeting. The first one I'd led in nearly a decade. No stage, no flashy deck, just me, standing in front of 300 people who'd lived through the fallout and stayed anyway. "I used to think leadership was about being the loudest voice in the room," I began. "Then I watched this company almost destroy itself because too many loud voices drowned out the truth." The room was silent, attentive, expectant. I came back here pretending to be someone else because I needed to see how Lucent treated people who didn't have power. What I saw was a company that forgot what made it worth building in the first place. You reminded me. I paused, meeting their eyes, the analysts, the assistants, the engineers. From now on, the foundation of Lucent isn't speed or dominance or market share. It's integrity. Because when integrity leads, success follows on its own. A ripple of quiet agreement moved through the crowd. It wasn't applause, not yet, just understanding. And that was enough. That evening, Daniel and I walked through the 21st floor, Ava's old domain. The glass walls still gleamed, but the atmosphere was different. Her office now belonged to Amira, a data analyst who'd once been too nervous to speak in meetings. Now she ran the entire strategy department. "Smart choice," Daniel said, nodding toward her office. "She earned it," I replied. "She never needed to shout to be heard." Amira caught sight of us through the glass and smiled. Not the nervous smile of approval-seeking, but the calm one of purpose. I smiled back. In the months that followed, Lucent flourished quietly. The headlines faded, replaced by progress. Clients returned. Employee satisfaction rose higher than any metric from the velocity era. But the best part? The culture finally learned that silence could mean reflection, not fear. One afternoon, as the sun slipped behind the towers, Daniel leaned against my office door. "Funny thing," he said. "Took her longer than most to learn it, but she did." Daniel tilted his head. "Think we'll ever tell people you came back undercover?" "Maybe someday," I said. "For now, let the myth do the teaching." That night, long after the office lights dimmed, I stood by the window and looked out at the skyline. The Lucent logo glowed softly in the reflection. Same glass, same tower, but a different soul inside it now. For years, I thought power was about control. Then I learned the truth. Control is fragile, but influence, the quiet kind, outlives everything. As I watched the city pulse beneath me, I thought of Ava, of Daniel, of the hundreds of people who'd carried Lucent through its darkest hours. Every one of them had been a reflection of the same truth, that power untested is just potential, but power humbled becomes wisdom. I turned off the light, letting the room fade to darkness except for the glow of the city. The illusion of control was gone. All that remained was legacy, built not on pride, but on patience. And this time, we wouldn't forget.